Kids are getting pretty wild in there, man. Is that safe?
Yeah, they're fine. I've got their keys.
We're going to go ahead and get started, everybody. We're going to start off where we left off yesterday, talking about the American War and the key.
Hey, have a beer, man. You deserve it.
It's not worth it. Underage drinking risks everything you're working for.
All right, good morning, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started now. Welcome to the Safe Streets Coalition and Freedom Now Coalition meeting. It is a pleasure to have all of you here today. If you haven't had a chance to, we encourage you to enjoy our great holiday dinner provided by G's Catering, and thanks to Topeka Credit Union Foundation for helping us be able to afford this great meal. So encourage you to enjoy. Please have seconds as well too. But we are going to go ahead and get started with our meeting. There is a slideshow over there that you're welcome to look at. We're trying to navigate the whole sun thing going on here. So I hope you can see it over there. But we, first of all, welcome to any new visitors that we have today. It's a pleasure to have everyone here, and we hope to see you back next year too. So first, I'd like to welcome Cindy Patton with the City of Character to make a presentation for our monthly Character Award winner. Cindy?
Thank you. Is Sheriff Jones here? I think he is. There he is, yeah. Come on up, Sheriff Jones. And also, I think Brian Cole is there out here too, right? Yeah, Brian Cole, would you please come up to make the presentation? And we're gonna recognize Jeffrey Brewer today. Jeffrey, can you come forward? It's hard to see. Jeffrey Brewer has been nominated for our Champion of Character Award. Would you do the honors for that, Sheriff?
I figured you wanted me to when you handed it to me.
Yeah. Come on over here.
All right. Well, obviously, for those that are new or probably just first time here, it's always taken a great pleasure and to recognize people that do over and beyond. Being good citizens is one thing, but when we look at our individuals or citizens of being heroes, we want to recognize that. So that's what brings us here today with Jeff. So of that then, recognizing him of the from Topeka City of Character and Safe Streets, we Character Recognition Council of Topeka, Shawnee County recognizes Jeff Brewer as the strength of our nation is dependent upon the health and safety of its communities. The strength of our community is dependent upon the character of its citizens. Topeka City of Character and Safe Streets Coalition of Topeka and Shawnee County recognizes Jeff Brewer. Jeff currently serves as a licensed clinical psychologist at Corizon Health Care at the Shawnee County Department of Corrections. Jeff became aware of an officer's expression to attempt suicide on social media. Corizon Health Care is contracted to provide medical and mental health services for offenders, both adult and juvenile. However, on this date, Jeff went over and above. Jeff reached out to this officer, gave him the assistance he needed, which resulted in the officer receiving immediate services through our local mental health agency, Vallejo. It was Jeff's training, compassion, and attention to a person in need that shined, demonstrating caring, professionalism, integrity, and responsibility makes Jeff Brewer a champion of character. And with that, we congratulate you.
I had to write this big enough today so I could read it without my glasses so my wife didn't make fun of me for being old. Thank you, Sheriff. I would like to say thank you to Safe Streets for this award. I would like to say thank you to Director Brian Cole for nominating me for the award. I would also like to thank my wife for being here today and several of my coworkers. Thank you very much. Due to the events that resulted in me being nominated for this award, I cannot specifically describe them in order to ensure confidentiality of the individual involved. What I will say is this: in 2004, I was lucky enough to be one of a chosen few at the Shawnee County Jail to be involved in training to be a crisis negotiator. Over the years, I've been lucky enough to be involved in multiple trainings with the Topeka Police Department and to go on various call-outs with them of barricaded subjects, suicidal individuals, mentally ill individuals, etc. Also, I have received a variety of training through the Kansas Association of Hostage Negotiators, where I was a board member for many years. One of the things I received training on is talking with one of our own. Despite receiving multiple trainings, it seems like it doesn't truly prepare you for a real-life situation where you're talking with a coworker in crisis. I liken it to people who have taken CPR classes but have never actually done CPR on a live human being. It's a very different experience, and it's quite scary. I believe that often God puts people in certain situations at the right time so they are able to assist those in need. I feel I was lucky enough on the night in question to have been there for my coworker. I love my DOC coworkers like family, whether they have been there for a week or for 20 years. The stress that they go through in their jobs is unimaginable. You would not completely understand unless you spent a day in their shoes. It's a wonder more of them are not in crisis. In any event, I was glad I could be there for my coworker in his time of need. But I also have to express that my coworkers have also been there for me when I was in need. I truly feel like I was only a link in a chain of individuals that also helped during this particular situation. I would like to specifically name and thank Lieutenant Matt Barnhill and Sergeant Hans Lewin of the Shawnee County Jail, and I humbly accept this award on behalf of them and all the others that helped out as well that were not mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And just encourage everyone, if you have somebody that's done something that's really special, be sure and make a nomination for a champion of character and just contact Safe Streets, and they'd be glad to process that nomination for you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you.
All right, on to the housekeeping portion of our agenda today. We sent out the minutes of the November meeting, and we need a motion to approve. Could I hear a motion, please? Second? All right, thank you all very much. Real quick, I'll give a staff update. For those of you who are new here or aren't familiar with Safe Streets, we are a program of prevention and recovery services, and overall, our agency's goal is to impact crime and substance use in our community. Our staff is Judy Wilson, who's in the purple over there. We have Lynn Smith, who's at the projector. Wave, Lynn. There's always got to be one. And we have a new addition, David Sotelo. David, he's from Wichita and just joined us. So we have a few more back in the office, but those are who are here right now. So if you have any questions or need anything, we are here to help you. Just encourage people. As the champion of character said, I mean, there's a lot going on in our community right now. And while it's a happy, jolly time of year, it may not be that way for everyone. So just encourage people, take a minute out of your schedule, look up, say hi to people, look them in the eyes. That can go a long way. And it also helps with crime prevention too, because if you're looking at people and making eye contact, it helps people to know that they're being watched and being aware of their situation too. So now I'd like to move on to our partner updates. I'd like to invite Sergeant Dan Wilson with the Topeka Police Department to come forward. Dan?
Hello, we're going to look at the crime stats. They're over here on the board if you want to look at the stats. Violent crime, as you can see, there's a lot of blue numbers there. We're doing a good job. Keep calling us, keep reporting stuff. We need your help out there. The next slide is the city property crime. As you can see, again, a lot of blues there, a couple reds. One of those reds, the suspect was arrested last month, and the number's high, but if you look at the numbers from month to month, it's all zeros or blues, which is obviously good. Some shopping safety tips. When you go out there, have a plan what you're doing, before you leave the store. Find your keys, remember where you parked your car, put your phone away, and like Christy talked about, have your head up, look around. If something doesn't look right, wait for, ask an employee to walk you out, wait for another person to leave the store to walk out with you. Some of our other slides of some of the stuff we've been doing and are doing. The Topeka Police Department is adopting families from United Way this holiday season as a way of giving back to our community. If you haven't done something for the holiday season, this might be a good idea in your office. We volunteered out at Winter Wonderland last, I guess, the end of November. And if you haven't been out there, go out and support that wonderful cause. And then tonight, if you're looking for supper, we'll be out with Special Olympics at Tip a Cop at Red Robin I think it's from 4:30 to 8:30. If you're not in the mood to cook, come on out and support a worthy cause, Special Olympics. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much, Sergeant. Sheriff Jones, would you like to make an update from the Shawnee County Sheriff's Office? He likes applause, it's a long walk up.
Hey, it's Herman Jones again. Yeah, go Hornets. All right, Stingers up. Really, I like to just segue right into what Sergeant Wilson talked about. This is a time of the year where we really need to be conscious of our safety. Doing the hustle and bustle of shopping, while you're out there, our attention is how many other things I need to do, where I need to go, and packages I need to buy, and whatever else. Well, pay attention, because there are people that are watching you. And there are those that will prey on our vulnerabilities. So our emotions are high, so our critical thinking goes down. We've got to always be thinking safety at all the time there. So of that then, I know that when we're out shopping, particularly at the mall, we'll have extra people out and about. I know our posse is working the parking lots on the horse, see those type of things right there. But be conscious about your safety in your homes, locking your doors. We've talked about that many times, the cars and those type of things. But if our firefighter partners are here, let's think about our consciousness of our electrical units. We see in fires in our homes. Let's not be so careless about certain things. Let's make sure we're taking care of that. But with any and all that, the advancements of what we have in our communications. Here recently, we've just made the announcement of our enhancement of our 911. It's the next gen, what we talk about. We now allow individuals to report incidents, crime, or whatever it is, not just by the voice of calling in, but now you can send a text to 911 center. You've got to have a data plan for that, but you now can submit that. We always advocate to give a phone call because we can get more information. Think about it. Some of us in this room probably don't type as fast as our kids do, but if things are happening right there, it's best to give that phone call. But there are certain situations where you don't want your voice to be heard. If you're secured in a location and you need to send some information out, the texting will benefit of those type of things, but there may be an exchange of some information or what have you there. But that's just one of the advancements of what we are seeing and what we need to do in our community to help you in staying safe. So of all those type of things, we're really pushing for the safety year-round. Now, I'll also put a plug in for Red Robin tonight. One of our big programs that we have in the community is Special Olympics. The money that goes towards the meals will go towards Special Olympics of Kansas there. You go there and you will see myself, probably Sergeant Wilson, probably the chief of police and many others, serving you in another capacity. And it's all for the benefit of the athletes of Special Olympics. So if you can, come on out. We'd love to see you out there. So anyway, be careful, be safe, all right?
Thank you, sir. All right, real quick, if you haven't already filled out your sign-in sheet at your table, encourage you guys to put your name down there too. That helps us keep track and make sure you're getting the most current information about meeting schedules. And we also have a review form too that encourage you to fill out after today's meeting. But now it's my privilege to introduce Barry Feaker, who will talk about our speaker coming up.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you all for being here today. If we could have a moment of silence for the 41st President of the United States, as well as our nation and our President's family. Let's do that now. Thank you. Michelle McCormick is the Program Director for the Center for Safety Empowerment for the YWCA. She is on the front lines of domestic violence and intervention and helping our community be a safer community. She also is the chair of the sector for social services and also engages in education not only about domestic violence but also human trafficking. Today we are privileged to have Michelle join us to talk to us about something that I think is fascinating. It's very much a big part of what we're trying to do here, and that's neurobiology, what's going on in the brain. And so please welcome Michelle McCormick.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. I am going to do what is a 3-hour presentation in 20 minutes, and you're going to be amazed. Basically, this is going to be an overview for what is a really complex topic. I've been doing victim advocacy work for about 20 years, working with victims of domestic violence, sexual violence, and human trafficking. And we always have been concerned about the impact of experiencing those traumas, but we've often really thought about trauma as really strictly a psychological issue, right? We've learned a lot, of course, from veterans who experience trauma and things about post-traumatic stress disorder. And we've had a lot of education about the psychological impacts of going through trauma. But boy, in the last 10 years, there has been an explosion of information about how the brain and the body is actually also impacted by trauma, like actual physiological changes that are occurring when someone's being traumatized. And I think that as we move forward as a group, really working together to create solutions for those who are being trafficked in our community, that it's critical for us to move forward from a trauma-informed perspective. So we're going to do a highlight today of what the neurobiology of trauma information that's available to us now. And I'll say right out from the beginning, if you are really curious, if this opens up your mind a little bit and you want more information, at the YWCA, we provide this training, a much longer version of this training for free to community members and groups all across town, so just let us know. And then I know we're going to get the opportunity to do some more training with Freedom Now sector leaders and other folks down the road, so hang on tight. So trauma, I think just to sort of get you a basic definition, it's really an extreme event. It's an extreme thing. I might joke that it's traumatizing to go to Walmart and go through the checkout lines when there's 2 checkout lines open and there's 8 million people there, right? I might say that's traumatizing, but that's not really an extreme event, right? We're talking about people who are going through incredibly stressful situations, and really the difference is that they have a lack of control of their circumstances or a perceived lack of control. And that sends an alarm bell to the brain. Something is really bad here. Something's going on, right? So we might see some of the behaviors and some of the impacts of trauma through people's behaviors, right? Like you might come up against somebody who's extremely aggressive, or maybe you've worked with somebody who has really poor boundaries, or they are just hypervigilant, like they're always on alert all the time. If you have seen those things in people, how many times have you connected that to a trauma response? Right? Sometimes we just kind of make judgments about people's behaviors and we think, boy, they're making poor choices, or maybe they have a character flaw, there's something going on with them, when really it could be about a trauma experience that they've had. And so that's what I'm going to ask you to think about today. What's great about this particular presentation is, like I said, we really depended on psychology research before. We depended on that to inform our perspective about what was going on for trauma survivors. But now we have the hard science. Like literally, neuroscientists are doing brain scans on trauma survivors to help us learn information about not only what's going on in the brain and the body, but then how do we support them? What kind of interventions do we put in place? And so now we have the hard science, which really has just been backing up what we've known all along for trauma survivors. And so I'm going to share some of that with you today. What I want to start by saying is that trauma responses are normal to very extreme and abnormal circumstances, right? When somebody is having a trauma response, they aren't making a choice about it either. It's just the brain doing what the brain does in order to protect someone, in order to survive a really extreme situation. And so sometimes I think we ask questions when someone's gone through a trauma. Like we frequently, for example, when somebody has experienced a sexual assault, I've heard people say for years now, things like, well, why didn't they fight back? If you were being attacked, why didn't you fight? Why didn't you fight against something? And what I hope you'll walk away from knowing is that people don't have control over which trauma response kicks in, right? If a woolly mammoth came charging through that door over there right now, I am gonna hope that my trauma response is flight. I'm gonna hope, right? Fingers crossed, I run. But I have no control over whether it's going to be fight or flight. That's really about how my brain and my body chemistry is made up. And so I don't choose to not fight either if I'm a sexual assault victim, right? It's different. A trauma response is different for everyone because our bodies are made up differently, right? We all have different biochemical makeup. And so your trauma response might be to flee in a situation where mine might be fight. So, and when to put it in context with survivors of human trafficking, think about that. Think about that number. What we're hearing from the people who research this is that the average sex trafficking victim has 5 customers a night, 7 days a week. So in a year, there are over 1,800 forced sexual encounters for a victim of trafficking. I have worked with trauma survivors, like sexual assault survivors, who have had one forced encounter, who have years worth of work to do in order to unwind the trauma that was created because of that. So when we're talking about working with sex trafficking victims, we're talking about 1,800 forced encounters a year. The level of trauma that we're seeing at our agency, and I know the folks at Restore Hope are seeing, is really complex. It's really complex. And when it's that complex, they deserve complex solutions. And so that's what we're sort of challenged with. So to give you the 5th grade version of the brain, you see over there, really we're all, if you have a healthy brain functioning, you have the frontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that's responsible for complex thinking and problem solving, right? And then you have the amygdala, which is the part of our brain that's really scanning for threats all along. It's sort of the fear sensor part of our brain that says, okay, this is a dangerous situation, we gotta kick in and go to work here. And then we have the hippocampus, which is really in charge of memory. We're going to focus on the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala here. Because in a normal brain processing system, and sorry camera guy, but I'm walking to the screen. In a normal brain functioning, we have the stimulus occurs, like right now you're getting a really stimulating conversation, right? This training is stimulating, your brain is processing the information, and it's going up to your prefrontal cortex in order for your brain to process it. And then it goes down to the amygdala, and you have your response to the stimulus that's going on. Well, that happens with lightning speed, right? The way I described it was really slow. That's happening really quick. But in the case of a trauma, your brain skips the prefrontal cortex part of the response and jumps straight to the amygdala. So if the prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain that's in charge of complex thinking and problem solving, and it goes totally offline during a trauma event, what kind of problems do you think that creates, right? People are just responding. They're just like survive, survive, survive when the trauma event is happening. They aren't thinking about things like, well, if I respond in this one way, it's gonna make it easier for law enforcement to investigate the case. Or if I respond in this other way, it's gonna create a more convincing case at the district attorney's office level, right? They aren't thinking about that stuff event because our brain doesn't allow us to problem solve in that way when a trauma event is happening. It is just survive, survive, survive. And so basically, when the amygdala gets triggered because of a trauma event, it engages the brain and the body to respond. And that response is really like a chain reaction of chemical reactions, where different chemicals are being dropped from your brain into your body to respond. And so you probably are familiar with some of these, right? You've all heard of adrenaline, right? I have one of those family stories where my little sister got her toe caught in a bicycle chain. She didn't have shoes on and she was swinging her leg back and forth in a bicycle and her foot got wrapped in the chain. And like my 6'5", 300-pound uncle went over to try to get her out of the chain and couldn't do it, right? Because it's a bicycle chain. And then my little 5'4" grandmother, who I look exactly like her actually, comes over and breaks the bicycle chain. And we were all like, ooh, grandma. Like, whoa. It's like lore in our family, right? Well, now, as a grown-up, I understand my grandmother actually has a trauma event related to bicycles. She lost a child who was hit by a car when he was on his bicycle. So when my little sister has a trauma event with a bicycle, my grandmother's brain responded differently than my uncle's brain. And her brain sent all of these chemicals through her body, and the adrenaline that was produced gave her super strength, right? And so we have examples of this in our culture. I just happen to have one in my own family. But what's important to know about when a trauma event is happening is that the different chemical makeup of our brain controls which chemicals get dropped. And that's different for a lot of people. One of the things that I think is important about this too is that this can explain some of the trauma responses that are counterintuitive to those of us who haven't been through a trauma or event and don't understand this, right? So, for example, you know what opioids are, right? Anybody had a child ever? When a woman has a baby, the second that, that's oxytocin. When a woman has a baby, oxytocin floods a woman's body so that instead of going, you horrible little monster that just put me through pain, mothers go, oh my God, the baby was so cute. Oh my God, I love the baby, right? That's the body being flooded with oxytocin. Well, in a trauma event, a lot of trauma survivors report, they have proven, are chemically flooded with oxytocin as well. This can create what we call a trauma bond, right? So the person who's being assaulted can actually feel a bond that is a chemical connection with the person who's caused them harm, right? So in my line of work, that helps me to understand why victims of domestic violence don't just leave. That helps me to understand a lot of trauma responses. And so understanding these chemical responses can help us to understand that we aren't always talking about these trauma survivors as just making bad choices, that it's so much more complex than that. And so the HIPAA axis, when it gets engaged, when that chemical drop happens, those chemicals can stay in someone's body for up to 96 hours post-assault. So that means the prefrontal cortex is offline, a little wonky, and the body is filled with all of these chemicals. Whoops, I'm going backwards. For up to 96 hours post-assault. And we expect a lot out of trauma survivors during this time period. We expect them to report immediately. We expect them to go into the hospital and be able to tell somebody what happened in a linear fashion. We expect a lot out of folks, and it's just not trauma-informed if we expect things to go that way. So So born and raised in Kansas. I've never lived outside of Kansas. And I have a fear of sharks. Probably because this movie ruined my life, right? Dear Mom, I was too young to watch Jaws. But my brain, like all of your brains, has a mapping system. And we map certain things to danger. My brain maps shark to danger. If I see sharks, if I hear the music, every time I do this presentation, I'm like, oh, the music's coming. My brain has like a fear response because my brain maps sharks to danger. My brain also happens to map dolphin to safety. I think dolphins are cute, they're safe. Flipper, you know, all those things. And so what can happen, in particular, in the trauma that we're talking about, in the victimizations we're talking about with domestic violence survivors, sexual assault survivors, and of course human trafficking survivors, is that they are being often victimized by people that they know. People that they are in relationships with. In fact, I can tell you that about 35% of the trafficking victims who have stayed at our shelter, they've been trafficked by their significant other, their husband, or their boyfriend. So they have relationships, they have actual attachments with some of the people who are harming them the most. Well, when you form attachments with people, like this is the way our brain works, right? We're designed to be people who connect with other people. We're designed to form attachments so that we can have family, so that we can have community, so that we can survive as a species that way, right? And so when your brain builds the attachment circuitry with someone, but then that person, which you have mapped to safety, actually turns out to be a shark, circuitry confusion. Your brain's like, what's going on here? You're a dolphin. I'm not sure what's going on here, right? And so it's not as simple as people sort of, for years I've had people say to me like, man, are they just not smart victims? Are they just that gullible? Like, are they getting duped? And what I can tell you is that our brain makeup is really designed so that people who we care about and have relationships with, we have to count on the fact that they aren't going to be the ones that hurt us. But yet they are the ones who are most likely to hurt in cases of human trafficking, sexual assault, and domestic violence. And so we talk about, at our agency, about the most common survival responses to trauma. And you all have probably heard of fight and flight, right? But I can promise you we are seeing more regularly, we are seeing the bottom two, which are freeze and appease. And I think it's important to understand that in particular for people who have complex trauma, they are much more likely to freeze than anything else. And so when you ask them, like, did you fight back? And they go, I couldn't fight back. It's because their brain recognized the threat to be so severe and so intense that it needed to lock down. It needed to just shut down as the way to survive the trauma that they're going through. And we have to be able to understand this in order to create solutions that will work with the people that we're serving. I think if nothing else, if we create solutions in this giant effort that we've got going here and it does not work for trauma survivors, then I'm not sure what we're doing this for, right? We have to make sure that we are creating a trauma-informed response when we're working with trafficking survivors and really trying to make the difference in our community. I think that it's important to me, it's important to our organization, and I know it's important to our partners that we've been working with, that the folks that we're talking about serving, victims of trafficking, have had every ounce of their power stripped away from them. And so as we're moving forward, I think one of the best things that we can do is to restore power to them, to restore choices to them, and do it in a way that's as informed as possible about, and help them understand that it isn't just a character flaw that they had that created their victimization, that it was somebody else who exploited their vulnerability, and that their trauma responses are just the way the brain and the body responds to trauma when it occurs. There are 8 million ways for you to get a hold of me if you want more information about this presentation. I know we're going to have an opportunity coming up soon that more information will come down the pike where we will do a much longer version of understanding this. But I appreciate the opportunity today to get to present at least a preview of this information as we move forward in our trafficking efforts. Okay, we have 10 minutes for questions. It was so good. That was like the fastest version of that presentation I've ever done. Anybody? All right, thank you. Oh, wait, yes? Great question. If I understand it correctly, you're saying, are we talking to victims and survivors about whether or not their needs were met when they were getting intervention, and how could we have maybe done better? What questions could we have asked? What kinds of things matter to them? I think that's happening. I know we're trying to do that at every level, is to make sure that we are engaging the survivors of this in order to help lift them up, almost even in leadership positions, so that we can be informed by them about what would have worked for them better. And I think that's just best practice. I think we should be doing that at every opportunity that we get to do that. When we solve the problem of human trafficking, how will that get communicated? Somebody's writing a book, right? Somebody, Barry, are you writing a book? We will definitely, I think the whole goal is for us to create sort of protocols that can get created and recreated and distributed throughout the entire sector so that we can all put in place trauma-informed practices. I really think that probably we'll get there once we get our initial work done. So yeah, that's the goal for sure. Great question. So are the trauma, sort of the impairment to the brain, is it permanent when people experience trauma? And what the amazing thing that's being is that we thought for a long time that it created brain damage, basically, and that you just were in trouble, that there wasn't any recovery of that. But actually, the latest research is showing that the brain is amazing, and you can't recreate the same neural pathways, as far as I understand it, but new neural pathways can be created. So we can help people with really specific treatment and trauma therapy and some other interventions, really help them to build new connections in the brain, and there can be some recovery to some of that. So great question. Anything else? That is interesting. So I think that probably there are more qualified folks in this room who could answer that question, because it's my understanding that there are a lot of approaches that get used in law enforcement training and in military training to help soldiers, for example, to be prepared to not have the automatic trauma response when they get put in a dangerous situation. I'm not sure that I'm aware of application of that in sort of the field of working with trafficking victims, but I would be interested to learn a lot more about that. I'm certainly open to the idea of doing that. I will say that the techniques that have focused on risk reduction, like teaching victims to do something differently, have not been nearly as successful as the efforts that go to preventing people from becoming the abusers. And so, like for example, there's some really good work that's being done about doing self-defense classes on college campuses. Now, I think self-defense classes can help people to feel stronger, to feel empowered, to feel like they're going to know what to do. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't stop the attack from happening. It just switches the target. right? I think you call that target hardening. Look at me, I'm pretending to be a law enforcement officer. Target hardening, right? It goes to somebody who you know, just like, you know, if we're talking about property crime, if I turn on my porch light, that might deter the burglar from coming into my house, but it doesn't stop the burglary from happening because they just go 2 doors down where somebody forgot to flip on their porch light. So risk reduction is always a part of the solution. It is definitely not the solution in my opinion, because again, I think that we can do some training about preparing to get our bodies and our brains to respond differently, but there is no guarantee that our trauma response that the brain is going to deploy is going to do anything different than freeze or appease. And so I think prevention efforts would be really well served if we were focusing on how do we stop those from becoming traffickers and how do we stop those from buying in order to create the demand for this service.
I think the big thing you have to consider too is that if you're training someone for their response to trauma, the things we train are real life situations. And so how do you create the situation that mimics a sexual assault? That's not really a realistic training scenario. And the second thing is if you're training people that are likely vulnerable to becoming victims of that, they probably lack resources in other areas, and the focus is not going to be on getting them training to respond if they're traumatized, because there's so many other resources they're going to need.
Yeah. Did you all hear the Lieutenant Cross? We can't really duplicate the scenarios in trafficking and in sexual assault in order to really train someone out of that. And so that would be a really difficult approach. Yeah.
Traumas happen as very early traumas in a person's life. So we're talking developmental trauma from when they were young children. They are already now prone to having that oversensitive system in their brain, so that when a trauma happens where they're raped as a teenager or they're taken into a trafficking situation, their brain's already oversensitized to respond to freeze or to appease or to do these things from when they were 2 years old. We really can't train a 2-year-old to prevent sexual assault. So that's difficult too.
Thank you. If you don't know the folks from Florence Crittenton, they're definitely a resource in our community and are practicing some of the most trauma-informed practices around the neurobiology of trauma, have a really great holistic approach, mind, body, everything. So thank you guys for being here. Anything else? I can't see any of you. Okay. That is a fascinating question. The question is there any coordination between the work that's being done with the National Football League and the impact of the hits to the brain and CTE and some of that stuff, and then trauma survivors? And I'm not aware of anything. Are you aware of any coordination? It'd be interesting to really look further into that. Yeah, I'm not sure that I've seen that sort of crossover, but I'd be interested. Mm-hmm. All right, thank you guys so much for having me, and to be continued, right? Oh, hi, there you are. I wandered around.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. That's some good stuff there, and that's just part of what she can teach us about, and there will be more training offerings in the future to be able to unpack this further. One of the statements that we said early on is the eyes cannot see what the mind does not understand or comprehend. Some of you already have understood this particular subject matter. Some of you, maybe this is the first time, but it certainly opens our understanding so that we can see it differently when we're engaging with victims of trafficking. Michelle said a lot of good things here today, but one of the things that really stuck out in my mind was 1,800 forced sexual encounters, average. So if you're questioning what we're doing here, why we're doing this, and why we've called it a war, that ought to be enough. Somebody needs to step up to the plate for these folks. Not only for the ones who are encountering those 1,800, but also the ones that are going to come after them. We got to stop this. And we really got a good team right here to do that. So I want to thank you for being here today. This ends our official Safe Streets portion of the meeting. Our sector chairs and vice chairs, if you would go back to the East Gallery now for a briefing. In about 15 minutes, if you're part of a sector team, please find your particular table, and your leaders will join you to go to the next steps after that. And all that said, have a Merry Christmas. Thank you.